the Monologue with Zibuse L Kunene. Glad you could join me. Now, it's a monologue on the video, but it's a dialogue on the comment section. So I'd like to just not waste time and get to the topic that I'd like, to share with you. It's a topic that I've been thinking about, a topic that is very important, especially and in particular for men. Now, this topic is kind of sensitive because a lot of men are going through certain things that, unaware or are aware, it impacts them and future generations. It starts in the Bible, a book called Genesis. A man called Abram. Abram was the son of Terah, and Abraham took wife. And when he took a wife, God told him at some point, God met him at some point, and then he says to him, look, dude, I want you to leave your father's house. And when you leave, I want you to go to a place that I will show you. And that's the very difficult thing to do. It's easier when somebody says, I want you to leave from here and go to a particular place, and there you will do A, B, C, and D. I mean, all of us naturally want to know at least some form of detail. God, you are moving me from here, and you're telling me to go there, and this is what you want me to do, and this will happen. That makes sense, but God does not operate like that. And if you go through the Bible, you will realize that God does not operate like that. He gives you a command, and then he says, I will show you, or I will tell you what to do when you get there. And so he leaves us at that point where we can either question or obey. And God works best in obedience. We see God come through for us in obedience. And this is what we will see with the story of Abram. Now, what happens with Abram is God tells him, go to a place, leave your father's house firstly, and go to a place that I will show you. So Abram says, cool, I'll take my wife and I'll take Lot, who is my late brother's son, and we will then go. And I'm sure even the two of them, along with the household that they had, they didn't know where they are going. They didn't know what is going to happen there. But because Abram trusted God, he then followed. And so Abram journeys, and God points him towards a particular direction. I'd like to put a point just there. Let's put a pin on that. As men, we are a logical people in that we want a lot of things that we do make sense. We want things to make sense. We want things to connect. If you're telling me to do this, and then what next? So we want all of that. And this is where we see Abraham. Interesting enough, another point that I just want to put a pin on it. Here, Abraham, what he does is he simply obeys. Whether obedience was taught to Abraham by his father, we don't know. The text does not tell us that. It only tells us who Abraham was and what he did when God told him certain things. And what makes Abraham special is that he constantly listened to God's instructions. When God told him this, he would do it. And you'll see later on in the story, when you read it, after struggling for so long for a son of the promise, Abraham is still willing to still sacrifice the very son of the promise. And you'll see just how all of that does not make sense when he then takes that instruction and then he obeys. It doesn't make sense that he has suffered all along for this child. Well, he waited a long time. The first son he had, it was through Hagar. And even that son, God said to him, this is not the one who is son of the promise. And so when the time comes for Ishmael to go, God does not hesitate to tell Abraham, it's okay, let him go. But the son of the promise is still coming. And so the son of the promise still comes. Now, think about this. You're a parent. this is your first, probably your only child. And God says, I want you to sacrifice this child to me. And God does not give you any other promise beyond that. He simply says, I want you to give this child to me. It really does not make sense why you would obey, right? But here we see later on, Abraham is obedient. Now, going back to the beginning of the story, God says to Abraham, go to a place which I will show you. And through this journey, we see how Abraham becomes Abraham. And then God says, I will enter into a covenant with you. And when I enter into a covenant with you, it will be for your future. Now, what is interesting about this, God gives him the promise before Abraham has any child. So God says to him, your seed and your descendants, actually your descendants will be blessed. And as the sand of as the stars in the sky, that's how you will be blessed. That's how big, that's how innumerable your generations will be. So God gives him a promise of the legacy. Now, let's then follow the story logically. So Abraham receives the word from God. And then Sarah, his wife, hears the word too. She believes it, but then to her it doesn't make sense, because now, at the time when this promise is coming, Sarah is old. And because she's old, she's gone way past the time of life. Abraham himself does not believe it, and yet he still allows himself to trust God at his word. And so when he does that, they say, okay, we will follow you, God. We will walk with you. We will go this journey with you. And so they do. They wait. But then Sarah sees that, it doesn't make sense. Again, the logic and the promise do not come together. So Sarah says, look, Abram, look, my Lord, because she calls him my Lord with a small L. She says to him, I am very old. I'm unable to have children. I do believe the promise of God that he will give you, and that your seed is blessed, and that you will have a child out of your own body. So here's Hagar. I will give her to you, and she will be your wife, and then you will go into her, and then I will have a child through her. So Hagar then becomes the unconsenting surrogate. Hagar gets pregnant, and as soon as Hagar is pregnant, there's animosity between the two. Hagar now starts to have some resentment towards Sarah. Sarah sees that, and then she deals with her harshly. She runs away. Hagar runs away into the wilderness. And this is also another key part where this topic of the seed, Abraham and you, comes in. That when Hagar is in the wilderness and she has ran away, an angel of the Lord meets with her. And when the angel of the Lord meets with her, he says to her, Hagar, maidservant of Sarah. So even the angel of the Lord recognizes her through her relationship with Sarah, not even the wife or the mother or the carrier of Abraham's seed. But nonetheless, the angel says to her, what are you doing here? She says, hey, my boss has been ill-treating me. My boss has been abusing me. So she's been too harsh with me. So I am just going to run. And so the angel says to her, well, look, go back because you are with child. Go back and submit to her. And so I would imagine, it is not in the text, I would imagine that Hagar is finding this very difficult, that you are here, the God who sees me, and you are telling me to go back to a place where I am telling you that I'm being abused and ill-treated. You want me to go back. Why would you want me to do that? I don't understand. But nonetheless, again, we see another aspect of obedience coming in, that Hagar obeys the angel of the Lord. But the angel does not let her go until he says, I will bless your seed. I will bless the child that you are giving, that you are carrying. And so God then imparts a blessing on Hagar's baby. And then he says that he will be great, he will be big, and he will be a carrier of many nations. And the story and the blessings are also articulated there. And so I was sitting here thinking about the story, but why, God, would you still bless a child who is not a son of the promise? Why would you still give this child that blessing that was supposed to come from Abraham, for Isaac, rather? I do not understand, why does it have to be that way? And then God says, takes me back, and he says, the promise and the covenant that I made, it was not to a child. The covenant and the promise was to the seed of Abraham, the seed, not the carrier of the seed. So the carrier of the seed is not the recipient of the promise and the blessing, but it is the seed itself that is receiving the blessing. And so if we then say the seed is receiving the blessing, is the seed really receiving the blessing, or is the seed already blessed? Because when God met with Abraham and he gave him the promise and the blessing, God said, your seed. The promise is to the seed, that your seed is blessed, your seed will be blessed, your seed will multiply. And so when we then think about it, if we look at the story of Noah and how God says to him, I want you to take every animal 2 by 2, take your wife and your sons and their wives, and then you all get into the ark. What is he preserving there? He's not preserving the people themselves, but he's preserving the seed and the seed carrier. And so the seed carriers and the seed bearers go into the ark together. And as they go into the ark, the seeds are preserved, because then it's different animals, and then the family of Noah, they are all then preserved. And so here we are, God is giving Abraham a promise. He is giving it to the seed carrier. And so the seed already is receiving the blessing. The seed already has the blessing. And because the seed has the blessing, when Hagar is sitting there running away and the angel meets with her, the angel is merely giving direction to the seed carrier that, listen, you are carrying a seed. You are carrying a seed carrier and a promise carrier, and a promise container, I mean. And with this promise container, what will happen is you will go back to the source of where this seed comes from. And what you will do, you will stay there until the right time. And lo and behold, Hagar goes back. About 13 years later, eventually, maybe even before, 10, around 11 or 10 years later, I think it may have been around 11. So God then comes to Abraham and says, look, I understand that you were impatient. I understand that you are now approaching 100 years old. But I want to be specific so that you do not make the same mistake that you made with your wife, where you try to find a surrogate. And in finding the surrogate, you then compelled me to bless your seed, which was not part of the plan. And I want to, again, put another pin there. The other pin, I'll come back to it. Here's what I want to share. Sometimes we become so impatient with God's promise, with God's fulfillment of his promise, that we end up thinking that we can assist God in the promise. We think that we can go ahead of God and say, God, I want to be assistant God, and I'll assist you in this thing that you have said. But God does not need that. And we need to be patient. Things may seem like, people may seem like they are growing and prospering around us. But at the end of the day, what God has said to us, the promises that God has made to us, they will remain. His word, he says in the Bible, that my word will remain. Even when heaven and earth pass away, my word will remain. So the promise that he has given you is not going to go unfulfilled. Sometimes we think the promise will manifest in our own lifetime, but that's not true, because then we see that Abraham even dies without being such a father of many nations as God had promised. But because he believed God and it was accounted to him for righteousness, he stays true to it. He passes on the knowledge, he passes on the promise. And so now, coming back to the story, God says to him, I want to be specific. It is going to be Sarah, your wife, who's going to carry this seed. You will then come together with Sarah, and both of you will give birth to the son of the promise. And that is when God is specific and clarifying, so that we don't make the mistake that we did in the past. So Abraham and Sarah do not then make the same mistake, but they trust God this time, even though it's so funny that they're very old. Abraham is 99, Sarah is, I think, about 10 years earlier, but she's gone past the age of menopause. Even she knows it. And lo and behold, that which they have written off in themselves, then God changes. And he says, I have made a promise to you. And I don't need you to go through your logic. I want you to trust me. I want you to trust my word, because the word that I've said, not one jottle or tittle, not one tittle or jottle will pass until it is fulfilled. And so I want you to hold on. I know it can be difficult, but I want you to hold on. And so they trust God this time around. And lo and behold, the son of the promise is born. And when the son of the promise is born, the son of their efforts cannot exist with the son of the promise. And so there's that contention. When Sarah sees Ishmael, ridiculing the son of the promise, she then says, send these ones away. Send these ones away. And so Hagar leaves. And look at how God is so faithful. God does not prescribe to Abraham how to send them away. However, Abraham packs a little provision for them, and he sends them away. Yes, he's not happy about the decision, but God says, listen to your wife, Sarah. Somebody else listened to his wife, and then we were out of Eden. But here we go. Abraham listens to his wife. He packs a little bread and water for whom we may call his wife, but in this instance, she's called the maid of Sarah. Packs that little provision, and they go. And they travel so far and so long that the provision runs out. The water finishes. And as it finishes, both of them get tired. And Hagar gets tired. And now that she's tired, she carries this boy who is about 12 years old at the time. She carries him and she walks and she realizes, I don't have enough strength anymore. She puts him down and he's crying. She goes to a place far off. And when she goes to that place, she says, I don't want to see this boy die. And then we pause. We say, but Hagar, don't you remember the promise that God gave you when you ran away the first time? Don't you remember what God said about this baby that you had been carrying at the time? Hagar has forgotten that. And isn't it funny that when we all find ourselves at a point where we are hungry, oh, there's another guy who was very hungry, and in his hunger he sold his birthright to his brother Esau. So here we are now. Hagar has forgotten because of her current circumstances. She's forgotten about the promise that was made, that this child, he will give birth to other nations, and the blessing was listed for him. She's forgotten about that. And now she's feeling the hunger, rightfully so. We are humans. We feel the pain. We cry. But in our crying, we should never forget God's promises over our lives. And we should always call God upon his word, not the word that somebody else conjured up and wanted to give to us, but God's word to us. God knows how to speak to us. He knows how to confirm that word to us. And so here is Hagar, hungry, tired, about to give up. She's far off. She cries to God. She cries. And the lad is also crying on the other side. And the angel of the Lord again comes to her and says, why are you crying? I've heard the cry of the lad, not yours. That boy, I've heard his cry. And then God provides for them at that point. What is God doing? Preserving his seed. God is being faithful to his seed. God is being faithful to what he said he will do, that seed will not die. And so now we see that when we are carrying a seed, it is very important for us to protect it, because we can be like Esau, who sold his birthright, which was a seed in and of itself, who sold his birthright to his brother because he wanted to be fed. I mean, he was at home. He could have gone home. He could have gone to his mother. He could have done so many other things. And yet he chose. What is this birthright? And I know that many men have sold their birthrights at the altar of convenience. It was just easy for you to make the decision to say, after all, this is going to take time. This will materialize now. If I can just compromise on this, nobody will see, nobody will know. I'll simply do it and wipe my lips, and nobody will ever find out. And so we sell our seed and we throw it away, and it dies. And then we blame God when things go wrong. So my friend, it's important that we become like Abraham, who carried the spirit of sonship. That is the model of what we need to follow. That no matter how much we struggle, never give up on the promise. And no matter how difficult things can be, no matter how senseless things can be, never, ever give up on what God has promised you. Because if you give up, then it's all gone. But it's not about you. You have given up on the future generations that were relying on you making the right decision then. You think that because it was hard in that relationship, in that marriage, that it was okay to take your seed and plant it elsewhere, just to satisfy your needs, just to satisfy your immediate needs. For just, 5 seconds? 2 seconds? You thought it was okay. Little did you know that you were throwing away a seed. That seed carried the promise. Generational promises, generational blessings were in that seed that you took and threw away. That seed and that promise that God has in your marriage, it is there in your marriage. It is for your marriage. And you decide, out of a moment of difficulty, out of a moment of lust, out of a moment of temptation, you decide you're going to plant your seed elsewhere. Maybe you took that seed and planted it in a plastic and threw that plastic away. A seed you threw away when you could have planted it. How often have you thrown away the seed? How often have you planted the seed? Just think about this. Which farmer do you know who goes into a field and they plant seeds and they walk away, never to water them, never to look after them, and they just simply leave them there? And yet most of us have done that. We've taken seeds, we've planted them, we've walked away. Sometimes we've taken seeds and gave them to seed carriers who were not even part of God's plan for your life. And so you thought that it was okay. And there we are, wondering why we are faced with so much difficulty. But this man, Abraham, he trusted God and it was accounted to him for righteousness. And because it was accounted to him for righteousness, God was faithful to give him this big promise. And it's amazing. I was reading this account, which for me, I find it just blew my mind. How God made Abraham very rich and wealthy. All that happened was they were in Canaan and there was famine, and then they left and went to Egypt. And because Abraham was afraid that the Egyptians will see how very beautiful Sarah was, they would have said, hey, let's kill him to get her so that she can be wife of one of us. And so they agree that they will say Sarah is the sister. However, Sarah was actually Abraham's sister, even though not what we can say full sister in the sense of the word. She was one of Abraham's uncle's children. And so she was basically his half-sister. And there they are in Egypt, and then they say, well, look, she's my sister. And then they take Sarah, they take her to the king, and the king says, wow, she's beautiful. And they give Abraham goats and sheep and livestock, a lot of it, just to say thank you. But while the king slept, God then visited and plagued the king. The king said, Abraham, why have you done this? Right? I would have taken Sarah and made her my wife, and then that you would have caused me to sin. So, guy, take what you have and go. They came in with little and they leave with much. And look at how God blesses them then. Just by that incident, but just by that favor. Some of us are married to women where God has placed his blessing on us as a couple. And we see ourselves prospering and growing in business, in work, in everything that we do. And we start to think it's all by ourselves. And we forget that it was all God's promise. And because it was God's promise, it is not for us to be big-headed about it. And therefore, I want to say, as I close this, we must learn to protect the seed. Be like Abraham. Abraham, who was faithful, who was obedient. We must be the seed protectors. Protect your seed. This is Zibuse L Kunene. You have been watching the monologue. It's a monologue on video, but not in the comment section. So if you've gotten to this point, please do like, comment, and then subscribe if you haven't done so already, because you will get more content like this going forward. We are part of a big family, and so the family is going to grow. You are part of the family.